Story 1. The person in my photos wasn't anyone I knew, but they were always there. This happened to me in 2017. At the time, I was going through my second year in a small graphic design agency in Denver. I lived alone in a one-bedroom apartment near Capitol Hill, a quiet spot with just enough street noise to feel lived in. I worked mostly from home, so my routine was simple. Coffee by 8, client calls, Photoshop, break, repeat. I wasn't particularly social, but I had a habit of photographing everything. Food, buildings, empty intersections at night. Not for Instagram, just for myself. I liked textures, old signage, reflections in puddles, things people walk past. Maybe that's why this happened to me. Maybe I noticed because I looked too closely. I found him by accident. I was working late on a branding mock-up and needed a background texture. I pulled up one of my old external drives, clicked through some folders, and opened a photo from a weekend trip to Santa Fe. Empty desert road, gas station, blurred mountains, and there he was, a man far in the background near the gas pumps, standing perfectly still, just looking in the direction of the camera. I hadn't seen him before, not consciously anyway. He was too small to make out clearly. Maybe 6 pixels wide, but there was something off about how visible he was despite that. Like he was centered by accident. I zoomed in, black jacket, pale face, no discernible features, just the implication of eyes. At first I laughed a little. Creepy stranger photobombs aren't exactly new. But then I clicked to the next photo, and the next. He was in all of them, never close, never in focus, but always there, somewhere. I zoomed out of that folder and opened another one. From the year before, a trip to Michigan to visit a friend. Lake photos, wooded trails. A blurry shot of the fire pit. There, between the trees, same posture, same jacket, facing the camera from a distance. I told myself it was pareidolia, that thing where your brain sees patterns in noise. Maybe it was just tree bark or someone else entirely, but the more I looked, the more deliberate it felt. The figure never changed clothes, never moved closer, always just there, still, framed like background noise. I spent the next 3 hours combing through every folder I had. Years of digital photos, birthdays, street shots, night walks, cafes. He kept showing up, a reflection in a window, a silhouette in a rearview mirror. Once he was crouched behind a garbage can, just barely visible. The thing is, I hadn't noticed him before. Not once, not even subconsciously. It was as if my brain had been skipping over him entirely, editing him out in real time. Now that I knew, I couldn't unsee it. The realization didn't hit all at once. It was slow, creeping. A kind of dread that built as I scrolled. Because the more I noticed him, the more I realized he wasn't reacting. He was observing, always from a distance, always just beyond the point of comfort. He never appeared twice in the same shirt, but his posture never changed. Head tilted slightly left, hands in pockets. There's a photo from a subway platform taken in 2015. I was messing with low light exposure. There he is again, behind the turnstile. Blurred, but there. The grain of the image makes it worse. I remember standing up from my desk, suddenly dizzy. I hadn't eaten all day. I opened an old folder marked Family 2008, back when I still used a Canon point and shoot. It was a group shot. My parents, my cousins, a birthday cake. I was in the photo, which meant someone else had taken it. And there, outside the window, behind us, standing in the yard, the same posture, looking in. He had been there before I moved to Denver, before I lived alone, before I even had the external drive I was searching. The fear didn't come from the photos, it came from the timeline. I'd been watched, not once, not briefly, but continuously, like I'd been the subject of something long, something patient. I took screenshots, cropped a few images, printed one. I wasn't sure what I expected to happen. Maybe validation. Maybe just someone to tell me it was nothing. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that whatever was happening, it wasn't new. It wasn't starting. It had already happened. I went to the police the next day. downtown precinct. I asked to speak with someone about a suspected stalker. They had me wait. When the officer came out, I handed him a manila envelope with the photos. I told him I wasn't being followed, not in real time, but I showed him what I had found in my digital archives. He looked confused, skeptical, flipped through the prints in silence. Then he smiled, the way people do when they think you're wasting their time. Could be compression artifacts, he said, or maybe just a guy who shows up in public a lot. You know, pareidolia, your brain connecting dots. I told him it wasn't just one photo. I showed him a folder on my laptop, photo after photo, spanning 8 years. He looked through a few, then stopped. Where did you say you were in this one? I told him, Seattle, 2014. He looked at me again, longer this time. I was stationed in Seattle in 2014, he said, 3rd District. He stared at the photo. His hand didn't move. Then he slid it back into the folder and cleared his throat. The tone changed. Look, he said, I'm not saying it's real, but I've seen that guy before. I asked him what he meant. He lowered his voice. There was a case we never closed. A woman who thought someone was stalking her, but not in person, in pictures. He was always in the background. Family photos, store security footage, tourist shots. The weird part was, he didn't do anything. He was never close, just visible. I asked what happened to the case. He shook his head. She moved away, stopped responding. I don't think we followed up. Then he added, sometimes I thought I was imagining it. He paused. I saw him in one of my own vacation photos, years later, in the background of a beach shot. Thought it was a coincidence. He looked tired. I shouldn't be saying this. There's no crime, no face, nothing we can act on. He tapped the folder. But I believe you. He handed it back and walked away. I sat in my car for a long time after that. It wasn't relief. It was confirmation. Whatever this was, it had happened before, to someone else, and no one stopped it. I tried to forget. That week, I went through every digital folder, every drive, every cloud backup. I deleted everything, photos, videos, timelines, wiped the slate. I took down prints, boxed up old albums, hauled them to a dumpster 6 blocks away. I stopped taking photos entirely, stopped carrying my phone unless I had to. I even taped over the webcam on my laptop, not because I thought he was watching through it, but because the lens was a window, and windows had rules I no longer understood. For a while, things felt quiet, not safer, just quieter. But then something strange happened. I was applying for a renewal on my passport, planning to leave the country, even if just for a week. The idea of distance felt like control, like something I could hold. 3 weeks later, it arrived. I sat down at my kitchen table, pulled out the little booklet, flipped to the page with my photo, and stopped breathing. Behind me, in the official headshot, blurred by the camera's shallow focus, barely discernible but unmistakably there, was a figure in the background, over my left shoulder. A man standing, smiling. My photo had been taken at a government facility. I remember the room, white walls, bland backdrop, no windows behind me. And yet he was there, just to the left of center, out of focus, as if he'd been standing behind the camera, reflected somehow, or layered in later. I didn't scream, I didn't throw it away. I just closed the passport and sat there for hours. It wasn't a haunting, it wasn't possession or delusion, it was presence. A kind that obeys no rules of time or geography or logic. They call them long-tail stalkers in rare psychological case studies. People who attach through insertion, not contact. They show up in visual history, public events. They are not close, but they are never gone. It's not the fear of being followed. It's the realization that you were never alone, even before you knew what to look for. To this day, I don't take photos. I keep no mirrors uncovered, no video calls, nothing that can reflect back what I didn't see the first time. And I've never renewed my passport again. I keep it in a drawer I no longer open, because the last time I did, his smile looked just a little wider, and I swear the background was darker than before. Story 2. She called my landline every night, but I never owned one. This happened to me in the winter of 2019. I had just moved into a small rental house in northwest Pennsylvania, a one-story place with pale blue siding, a crooked mailbox, and a heater that never stopped clicking. It was cheap, which was the only reason I took it. I had been recently laid off from a tech startup in Pittsburgh and needed somewhere quiet, somewhere small, to figure things out. The house came furnished, mismatched chairs, an old corduroy couch, and a tiny desk that sat in the living room, facing a blank wall. The realtor had mentioned the house was built in the early 60s, but updated at least somewhat in the late 90s. That turned out to be generous. The electrical outlets hummed, the light switches clicked like snapping bone, and the kitchen appliances were yellowed with age. But it was quiet. That mattered more. I had no internet the first few weeks. I used my phone's data for everything and worked off a hotspot when I had to. There was no television, and I didn't bother buying one. Most nights, I just read or wrote job applications, and then the phone rang. Not my cell, a different phone. I was in bed. It was 11:42 p.m., and I was half asleep when I heard it. A crisp, metallic trill, like something out of a different decade. 3 tones in succession, then a pause, then again. I sat up, confused. My phone was dark. No vibration, no alerts. But the ringing continued. I got up, thinking maybe it was something outside. Maybe a neighbor's porch phone or a weird ringtone echoing from a car. It didn't stop. I followed the sound, through the hallway, into the living room. The sound was coming from the desk, specifically from inside the desk. I pulled open the top drawer. There it was, a beige landline phone, coiled cord and all, tucked beneath some papers and an old envelope. Dusty, unplugged, or so I thought, but it was lit. The screen blinked faintly. The incoming call display flashed on and off. I didn't touch it. I stood there waiting, listening to the unnatural trill echo off the walls. Eventually it stopped. I opened the drawer wider. The phone had no visible cord, nothing plugged into the wall, no dial tone when I lifted the receiver. I laughed a little, nervously, told myself it was probably battery-powered, maybe one of those wireless base units that still work when charged. I looked underneath the desk. Nothing, just a tangle of carpet fibers and a single empty outlet. The next day, I took the phone out and left it on the kitchen counter. I even removed the battery panel. No battery inside, no contacts even, just hollow plastic. I left it there and tried to forget about it. That night, the phone rang again, 11:43 p.m. This time, it only rang twice. I didn't move. I just stared at it from my bedroom doorway, frozen. There was no incoming number. The screen only showed the word, caller. Nothing else. The following day, I called the realtor. I asked her if anyone had ever reported anything strange about the property. Odd wiring, leftover electronics, that kind of thing. She said the previous tenant was a bit of a collector but left most of the junk behind. She seemed distracted. I didn't push. That evening, I unplugged everything in the house except my phone. I checked every wall, every outlet. There were no lines, no coax cables, no phone jacks, nothing. I even looked behind furniture. Still, at exactly 11:43 p.m., the phone rang 5 times this time. I lifted the receiver. There was no sound, just a faint hissing like static on a dead radio. But beneath that, a rhythmic pulse, almost like breathing. Not mine. I set it down. Over the next few nights, the pattern didn't change. Same time, slight variations in duration. Once it rang 7 times. Another night, it rang once, then stopped, then rang again 2 minutes later. But what disturbed me most wasn't the ringing. It was the sound. Every time I picked it up, I heard the same soft breath, inhale, exhale, a faint rustle like fabric shifting. No voice, just presence. The fear wasn't sharp, it was slow, dense, the kind that accumulates layer by layer until your routines feel suspicious. I started sleeping with my bedroom light on. I kept my shoes near the door. My phone never left my pocket. The landline remained in the drawer. I stopped trying to remove it. I finally answered it. It was a Wednesday. Snow had fallen quietly that evening, blanketing the porch and muting the already silent street. I'd had a headache all day and hadn't spoken to anyone in over 48 hours. At 11:43 p.m., I sat down at the desk. I didn't wait for it to ring. I picked up the receiver first. Nothing. Then a single trill, loud and immediate, right in my hand. The display didn't flash this time. It stayed dark. But I heard it. A voice, not through the earpiece, but from somewhere behind the static. It wasn't quite separate, more like embedded in the sound, like a shape in mist. It said, "Don't move this time." The voice was mine. Not similar, not close. Mine. Same tone, same breath rhythm, but not the way I speak. It sounded like me after years of silence, after forgetting what warmth was. It was brittle, dry, like something half-rehearsed. And then I don't remember what happened. Not exactly. I remember standing in the kitchen, barefoot. My hand was wet. I looked down and realized the sink was full. The faucet was running. I had no memory of walking there, no memory of turning it on. I turned it off, sat down, shivered. The next morning, I checked my phone's voice memos. I must have hit record at some point because there was a 10-minute file, time-stamped 11:42 p.m. I played it. It was me, breathing, shaky, uneven, then whispering something. I couldn't make it out. It was faint, distorted by static. Then my voice again, repeating a single sentence. I didn't move, I didn't move, I didn't move. 7 times. The file ended in silence. I started keeping notes after that. Time logs, weather, what I ate, everything. I wanted to feel control over the hours, but it didn't help. The calls came every night, never skipped, always at the same time. One night, I picked up and heard myself laughing. Not joyfully, just soft, dry laughter, like I'd heard a joke too many times. Another night there was music, old piano notes, barely there, playing under my voice, whispering something I couldn't understand. I bought a white noise machine. I stopped answering, but the phone kept ringing. Until one night, it didn't. 11:43 passed in silence. 12 count, 1 downed AM. No call. I should have felt relieved, but the silence wasn't clean. It was thick, like waiting inside a pause that had no end. That was the only night I saw the light. At 2:14 a.m., a faint glow came from the hallway. Not electric, more like the pale warmth of a memory, dim and amber, like light through a dusted window. It hovered by the desk. Then it blinked out. No call that night, but in the morning the phone was off the hook, lying sideways on the floor. And there was a note resting beside it, folded once with no name. Inside it said, "Don't speak again until she does." I don't know who she is, but I haven't said anything out loud since. I broke down and called the police. It was late January by then. Snow covered everything, and I hadn't left the house in almost a week. My phone had no recent messages. The only communication I received was through that phone. That night, the phone rang at 11:43. I didn't answer, but it didn't stop. It kept ringing. 10 minutes, then 15, non-stop. I finally called 911 from my cell and told them I thought someone had tapped into the house line, that maybe it was some old line or interference, or maybe even a stalker using radio signals. They sent 2 officers. They checked the desk, the phone, the walls. They found no wiring, no landline jack, no service record to the address for over 15 years. The phone was examined, confirmed as non-functional, hollowed out, no circuitry, no chip. Still, I asked if they could take it with them. They agreed. One of them placed it in a bag and walked it to the car. The other asked if I'd been experiencing any recent stress. I didn't answer. He left me with a card and told me to follow up if the calls continued. They never made it to the car, because when I went into the kitchen, the phone was back on the counter, ringing, not in the bag, not gone, just there. The same ringing, the same display. Caller. I didn't pick up. I walked away. 3 days later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. It contained a single printout from an archived research paper titled Acoustic Residue in Isolated Electrical Systems. It described a theory. Some houses, particularly older ones, particularly those with trauma, can retain sonic artifacts in outdated infrastructure, not through electricity, but through resonance, through heat, through human presence. These are called self-looping hauntings. They aren't ghosts. They're moments, repeating, unmoored from their source. Sometimes the voice you hear isn't someone else, it's you, from another version of time, another collapse, another ending. I searched the house again, and in the cupboard above the sink, taped to the inside of the door, was a note, handwritten in my handwriting. We talked already. I haven't used my voice since then. I don't trust what might come out. The phone still rings, but not every night, just when I start to forget the sound. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. Story 3. Every stranger I passed whispered the same phrase, but I could never hear it fully. This started in the fall of 2022. I was commuting into the city every day for work, a tech job downtown, nothing glamorous. I lived in one of those commuter neighborhoods on the outskirts, and most mornings were uneventful. I'd catch the 6:40 a.m. train, get off at Civic Center, grab a coffee from the kiosk near the stairs, and walk 4 blocks to the office. It was a rhythm, predictable, mindless. That's why I noticed when it changed. The first time it happened, I was walking past the turnstiles at the station. A woman coming toward me, early 30s maybe, business casual, earbuds in, brushed past and said something under her breath, not loudly, just enough that I could tell her lips moved. I thought maybe she was on a call or whispering a reminder to herself. But then it happened again. A man in a hoodie passed by. His mouth moved just as our shoulders aligned. Again, no real sound, just that distinct mouth movement, the start of a word, the breath before a second syllable. I turned to look at him, but he was already past me, eyes forward. That morning I noticed 5 different people doing the same thing, all of them walking past me, all of them whispering something as they crossed paths, always just below the threshold of clarity. It made my skin crawl, not because of what was said, but because of the pattern. Once you start noticing something like that, you can't unsee it. The next day I counted 9, different people, different clothes, but the exact same moment, lips parting as we passed, the same quick motion of the jaw, just 1 or 2 words, never loud enough to hear. I started slowing down when I walked, turning slightly, as if tying my shoe, pretending to check my phone, trying to catch the sound. Still nothing. The timing was perfect. Like they knew exactly when to whisper, just as they were parallel to me, just before their mouth passed out of view. By the end of the week, I was avoiding eye contact with everyone. It wasn't fear yet, it was something worse. Recognition. These people weren't interacting with each other. They weren't glancing around or smirking like part of a prank. They weren't acknowledging one another at all. But they were doing the exact same thing, without hesitation, without variation, and only when passing me. One afternoon, I left work early and took a different route home. Not through the usual train stop, but a transfer that added 20 minutes. At the new station, it happened again. 2 teenagers walking in the opposite direction passed me on the stairs. As they did, one of them turned slightly, just enough to let their lips hover near my shoulder, and whispered something I couldn't hear, then kept walking. I froze. The kid didn't look back. Neither did the other one. That's when I realized it didn't matter where I was. It followed me. I started riding the train later than usual, 7:40 instead of 6:40. Different crowd, fewer suits, more students, night shift workers, people half awake. I thought maybe if I changed the routine enough, it would break. It didn't. Even the new passengers, people I'd never seen before, did it. Quiet lips moving as they passed, always in the same rhythm, same angle of the head, like muscle memory. On Thursday, I made a decision. I was going to confront one of them. I didn't know what I'd say. I just knew I couldn't keep pretending this wasn't happening. The train was packed that day, standing room only. I wedged myself near the center pole and scanned faces. Most were blank, tired, immersed in their own morning rituals. Then I saw him, mid-40s, salt and pepper beard, dark jacket. He was seated across the aisle, staring at his knees. But the way his jaw was moving, barely, caught my attention. I watched him for 2 stops. Then, just before the third, I leaned over and said quietly, "What are you whispering?" He looked up. His eyes were wide, red around the rims, not shocked, panicked. He didn't answer right away. His lips moved again. I leaned closer. This time I saw it. He wasn't whispering words. He was mouthing them, silently, repeating something. His mouth formed the words, "I can't stop." Then his jaw locked. He stared forward, hands clutching the seat in front of him. I backed away. When the train pulled into the next station, he stood and bolted through the doors. Didn't look back, just disappeared into the crowd. I sat down in the seat he'd left, tried to steady my breathing. Then my phone vibrated. New voice memo saved. I didn't open it right away. I hadn't recorded anything. There was no app running, no Siri activated. It just appeared, untitled. Time-stamped for the exact moment I'd asked him the question. I put in my earbuds, pressed play. At first there was only static, then faint background noise, train wheels, chatter, then a voice, mine, but warped, flattened, as if recorded through a dying tape deck. "Don't stop it, let them finish, it's already in motion." Then another voice, overlapping, the same sentence, repeated 3 times by different tones, different accents. "Not what you hear, what you remember." Then silence. I deleted the file, turned off my phone. When I got home, there was a voicemail, unknown number. It was 2 seconds long, a whisper. "Now you've seen the pattern." I didn't sleep that night. I told myself it was stress, sleep deprivation, burnout, echo chambers of anxiety. I tried to stay offline, avoid looking things up, but I slipped. One night I typed the phrase "public whispering hallucination" into a medical forum. I didn't expect to find anything, but there was a thread. Anonymous, dated years earlier. Title, "Everyone I pass whispers something. Am I schizophrenic?" The original poster described the exact same experience. Strangers whispering as they passed. Never audible, never breaking character. I clicked the profile. Last activity, 7 years ago. No replies. But several bookmarks, all referencing niche studies in behavioral mirroring and something called contagion haunting. I clicked one. The abstract mentioned small groups of people in urban areas reporting synchronized movements in strangers. No delusions, no hallucinations, just observed repetition, consistency without origin. They called it non-clinical psychogenic repetition. Others called it folklore, a metaphor, a warning. The next morning I went to the precinct, told them I was being followed, not by one person but by behavior, described it as best I could. The officer at the desk listened without writing anything down, just nodded. Then he leaned forward slightly and whispered, "He'll know you told." I didn't move, didn't blink. Then he smiled like nothing had happened, told me he'd file a report. I left. That night, I received an envelope in my mailbox. No name, just an address stamp from a hospital in New Jersey. Inside, a printed scan of a psychiatric intake form. The name was redacted, but the entry date was clear. January 4th, 2009. Symptoms listed: auditory perception of whispered voices in strangers, inability to isolate phrases, paranoia tied to recurring proximity phenomena. Outcome: patient vanished during second evaluation. Room left undisturbed. Audio cassette recorder left behind. Final recorded words: they only whisper what you forget. That same phrase started repeating in my head for days, until I noticed something else. I had begun whispering to myself, not words I chose, not things I remembered saying, but fragments, disjointed syllables caught only in reflections. The last time I looked in the mirror, my lips moved on their own, a shape I hadn't intended, so I stopped going outside. But I still hear them, through walls, through static. Every night around 3:17 a.m., I hear footsteps outside my window, then silence, then breath, then the whisper, not mine, but wearing my rhythm. Tell the next one softly, so they never know when it started.